Hello, Dr. Houchens. Good
Hello.
afternoon. And can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, well, thank you for allowing me to interview you because I saw your article on Chalkboard review uh, and uh, uh, and especially your experience. You pretty much being a teacher, then you went to the administration, and you're uh, teaching at the college, and to train future school superintendent. So you has been through all that. Uh, have you ever been on a school board? Just wonder.
I have not. No, when I was a district administrator, we worked quite closely with our school board members, and I regularly attended those meetings, and got to know the inner workings of school boards pretty well in that role.
Wow, wonderful. I mean, that's just something I want to know because because I don't know anyone has been in that position or from that perspective. Just to talk me, seem to me that there are something are so obvious, but they just somehow they don't pay attention to it. For example, the whole DEI thing, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this is just pretty much political indoctrination, and they still like hire officers, in many school corporations. So how do you make sense of that?
Well, I think I want to say, first of all, that I think most of our school board members in our public school districts in the United States, they work very hard in their roles. They care very much about the students that they are serving in their districts. I think what has generally happened in the past is that most ordinary citizens don't pay much attention
Right.
to what goes on the local school board. In many cases in the past, in a lot of districts, those board members often run unopposed.
Right.
They serve many terms without any opposition.
Right.
And so I think what happens there is that those board members, many of whom may have full-time jobs working in totally different fields, they wind up deferring to the superintendent, district administrators, about the vast majority of decisions that have to be made in the schools. And that may be because they don't feel like they've got appropriate technical expertise to push back or ask the right questions. But we've just created a kind of a pattern, I think, in a lot of school districts where the school board members generally rubber stamp whatever it is that the superintendent asks them to support.
Right.
And I'm sympathetic to why they are that pattern exists. But of course, what we have now is a very different situation in the United States, where I think due largely to COVID and many of the things that have happened and emerged with COVID, but also with the proliferation of certain left-wing ideologies, both in terms of curriculum and in student programming,
Right.
through social emotional learning and diversity and inclusion programs. I think parents and the general public are far more aware of what's happening in schools than they've ever been.
Right.
They're far more concerned about it.
Yeah.
Asking school board members tough questions like they've never had to face before.
Right.
And I think in a lot of communities are going to be challenging those school board members with opponents in their elections. And so the nature of the school board member role, I think, has changed quite a bit in recent years. And I think they're no longer able to just simply say, well, the superintendent thought this was a good idea, so this is what we're going to do.
Right. Right. Yeah. And also, like, at least from my experience at the several school district, and the school board basically they don't, I mean, some school board allow the parents to talk, and some even don't allow parents to make a comment. And but no matter what, the school board just never respond to the parents' concerns, and that is kind of I think get a lot of parents upset.
Mhm. Yeah, here in Kentucky, we actually have legislation pending in front of our General Assembly that will actually require school boards to allow a public comment period at the end of all of their meetings. And this actually came as a surprise to me because in most of the districts I've been associated with, public comment was typically
Right. Yeah.
permitted. But I learned that especially after COVID, there were a number of school districts that haven't had a public comment period possibly in 2 years.
Right.
Of course, that's completely unacceptable for
Right.
an entity that is funded by taxpayers and is, directly accountable to the people.
Right. Like my school district is a center group school district. The school board basically they passed a policy which basically says that if any parents wants to make comment, they have to submit uh, their request to be on the agenda. And most time, the school board won't put them on the agenda. So therefore, you are not allowed, basically. So, I mean, it's in, even though they didn't say we don't have open comments, but in effect, they shut off the open comments. And that's, I think also, it's quite, I think quite common in Indiana. And that's why a lot of parents are now focused on the legislatures and trying to pass some kind of policies to change that. And like, it makes sense, like in your case in Kentucky, that which shouldn't, just in a normal case, it shouldn't be a problem, right? Now
That's right. Yeah, and
administrator.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think those policies in the past that a lot of districts have used, that you had to get on the agenda in advance, I think that was used, in part to be able to predict how long a school board meeting was going to run, but also, if possible, to head off, a parent comment by trying to figure out what is the person concerned about, and is there some way we can deal with that so that they don't actually have to interact with school board members. And so there's probably some pure intention at the heart of all of that, but the effect of it is ordinary citizens feeling like they've been disempowered and denied a voice in front of an elected and publicly accountable body.
Right, because I mean, there's no communication between parents and the school board. And I did look into the school board policy. The way you wants to talk to school board members is that they said that's actually in their policies. They require parents to follow the chain of commands. So basically, you have to talk to the teacher first. Then, if a teacher doesn't listen, you move on to administrator, and then you move on to superintendent. Then you move on to school board. But that to me is not right, because we elect those school board members, right? They are responsible to us. We should have communication with them. And now somehow they look at themselves at the top of the totem pole, and then you have to go through all that to get to them. Have you run into something like that?
Yeah, and that's not unusual.
Okay.
And again, I think there's probably a good idea that was originally at the heart of that. And if you've got a problem with your child's teacher and you haven't discussed that with the teacher,
right,
by talking to somebody much higher up the chain, you're not going directly to the source, and it might be possible to solve that problem with just good old direct communication. But on the other hand, like you said, I think we've now emerged into a time when people have to understand that school boards are they're servants. They are public servants. They are directly answerable to the people, and so it may very well be that a school board member has to say to someone, "Have you talked to the teacher or the principal about that?" And if the person has not, then maybe the board member is in a position to say, okay, well, listen, you talk to those folks, and then if you're still unsatisfied, you can come back and talk to me. Right? But that door has to always be
Right,
open,
right,
and just as it would be for someone who was an elected state representative or a member of the city commission and so forth,
right.
uh, and I just think board members more than ever have got to be very careful to make sure that they are making themselves as accessible and as authentic and as accountable to the people as they possibly can.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have seen this a lot in at least I live in Greenwood, which is suburb of Indianapolis. So there we have several counties around Indianapolis called donut counties, and they are mostly are like middle class kind of families. So there are the parents are really frustrated because uh, they send the emails, they make phone calls, and they couldn't even get to talk to any school board members. And so that's why now we see uh, parents' energy now is kind of focused on the legislatures. But as a teachers, I mean, I also have a concern. I mean, uh, there's some, I mean, well, just like you said, there's policies when they made, they maybe have good intention, but it could be have a unintended effect, and as teachers, and those actually will come down directly, eventually get to teachers, right? So yeah, so I was, in a way, uh, I don't I don't think the legislatures can really solve the problem. They may add really maybe add more problem into it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We're in a position now, I think, where a lot of people are appealing to state legislators because they don't feel like they can get any
Right.
satisfaction or any communication or any justice from their local school boards, and
Right.
that's a sign that there's been a real breakdown
Right.
in the system. And I mean, I think we ought to be looking to our lawmakers to take action to improve transparency
Mhm.
in terms of what is being taught and how it is being taught, and to ensure high levels of accountability. But at the end of the day, I think the solution that we're looking for here is more democracy
Right.
at the local level. We
Right.
need citizens more engaged, more informed, and actively trying to understand what's happening in our schools and make their voices heard
Right.
and make those school board members accountable to the community and to the public in a way that they've not had to be before.
Right. Exactly. And your article, I know you have several articles on Chalkboard review. So the one kind of caught my attention is that uh, you basically are how to say that you are fighting against the education establishment. So what do you mean by that? What do you mean by education establishment?
Right. Well, I've found myself having to answer the question many times over the years. Why are you, a public school guy,
Right.
so often at odds with the public schools? And that's because I'm an advocate for school choice.
Right.
I'm an advocate for pension reform. I'm an advocate for educational transparency, for curriculum improvement, for parents.
Right.
And so, what I've really come to say over the years is that I'm not an enemy of public school teachers,
No.
sure. And I'm not an enemy even of public schools.
Right.
I find myself in conflict with the education establishment, and
Mhm.
that establishment does not represent the voices of most educators.
Right.
And so, what I say is the education establishment is really that network of teachers unions and professional associations that represent teachers and administrators and boards of education. And there are many great people who work within that establishment. Many of them are personal friends of mine and long-standing colleagues. But the effect of that education establishment has, in my opinion, over many years, been to defend the status quo and to defend adult interests
Right.
within
Yeah.
the education system, rather than to represent the voices of the most marginalized students and families. And
Right.
at the end of the day, I say, you know, that's who I entered this business for in the first place. I did not become a public school teacher 25 years ago because I was so enamored with the infrastructure of public education. I wanted to help students.
Right.
And
Yeah.
my commitment to students, and especially to students of poverty, as I've worked in this system over the years, has grown stronger and stronger. And I began to see in so many ways how the education system itself actually makes things like the achievement gap worse,
Right.
and how in so many ways it keeps kids stuck in schools or in systems that are not really in their best interest.
Right. Yeah.
That's where I devote my energy as a guy who's interested in policy and as an educator. Those families, they don't have a professional association or a lobby group in our state capital to represent their interests. That's where I come into play, and it means that I'm frequently at conflict with people who are friends of mine and people
Right. Yeah.
I appreciate and admire. But at the end of the day, if there's an issue on the table, and it's an issue like school choice, for example, and I have to side with the education establishment, or I have to side with children and parents who need another educational option, I'm gonna be against the establishment, and I'm gonna be for those students and parents.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like when I was in private school teaching, and that's I kind of realized that there is a fundamental flaw in our public education system, is that people in the adults, the grown-ups in the system, they are not really responsible for the students, because the whole structure, the benefits, the the salary structure is really make you always responsible to the people on top of you, not on the students. So even the student don't do well, it does not affect you. But if you don't listen to your superiors, and you could get big trouble.
Yeah, and it's worse in that respect than it's ever been, especially as sort of left-wing ideologies have come to dominate more and more of teacher training and teacher professional development, of how they've seeped into so much of our curriculum. There are teachers who are afraid. They're not just afraid to challenge the sort of management of their schools and districts. They're afraid to speak out on public policy issues that would have a direct impact on their own students, because they're worried about the professional consequences of doing so. And that's a really grave concern to me.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I witnessed the incident back to the school I used to teach. Is that one time a school board member gave us a training on restorative justice, and one of the teachers basically just said something, not trying to be confrontational, but just saying that this does not work. Sounds good, right? But in practice, it may not work. And our principal actually demand him to apologize to the school board member. And this is just, to me, it's kind of weird, right? The person who is promoting restorative justice and couldn't take someone who have different view and demanding apology. They're just like, this is so wrong.
Right. There's a kind of soft censorship that has really come to dominate a lot of the corporate world, and certainly in higher education, we've found many examples of that, and sadly, it's sort of seeping into the K-12 world as well. And it is ironic sometimes how it comes out.
I know. Especially during those past 2 years, the mask mandate and vaccine mandate, and many people, especially teachers, they saw that the masking does not work, but they are afraid to speak out, because you could get fired for that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I'm aware of, teachers who were told, directly or indirectly, you are not to post anything on
Right,
social media questioning the Board of Education about their masking policy. And so, that's a direct violation of teachers' First Amendment rights. But
right.
I know for a fact that it happened in more than one district that I'm familiar with, where their First Amendment right to speak out on a public policy issue was directly threatened by their employer.
Yeah. Well, actually, I personally had a how to say uh, incident with my school board. I mean, private school, we have a school board, but the school board was not elected by the parents. It was appointed by the previous school board. And so the school board actually made a decision to increase our tuition by 40%. And so we didn't know. They didn't tell us. They didn't even talk with our teachers. Just made decisions. Basically, you take it or leave it. And in the end, a quarter of families left. But some parents was asking me about it, and I didn't even know. So I was kind of responding to them, and pretty soon I was called into office, said, "Don't say anything."
Yeah, and that's a good example of how many of the kinds of problems we're talking about here aren't necessarily fixed by just going to a private school, right?
Right,
That
no.
the private schools themselves are also sometimes subject to these kinds of real issues of transparency and accountability and sensitivity to teacher needs and parental concerns.
Right,
And that's why at the end of the day, school choice does not fix everything that's wrong with education by a long shot.
right.
There are many other policy solutions that we need to bring to bear in our education system. But I can't think of a single education reform that isn't also made stronger by giving parents the
The choice.
opportunity
Yeah,
to opt out if they're unsatisfied with what's happening in their child's school. And so, that's why at the end of the day, I just think our entire way of funding education, while it served a noble purpose once upon a time,
right, right,
undermine student and family issues. And we need to be looking for policies that promote the idea of funding students rather than systems.
right.
That's the ultimate form of parental empowerment.
Yeah, but by doing that, you basically uh, that policy will weaken the power of teachers union, and that's why they they don't they don't like that. They don't.
That's right. It has the potential to empower teachers and disempower the teachers unions,
Right,
and that's exactly why they don't like it.
right, exactly. Yeah, I know many teachers. I mean, they really care about students, but I think things become more and more difficult for them to actually teach. And now, especially, we have the social emotional learning are taking a lot of time, and also a lot of practices like the restorative justice and all that really causing a lot of trouble for teachers. But of course, the teachers unions are not really doing anything to help that.
That's right. Yeah, and it puts ordinary teachers in a really bad kind of situation.
Right.
And teachers are not trained to be therapists.
Right.
Uh, they're not trained to be pastors. The dimensions of child development that are often addressed through SEL are at the end of the day they're family and church kinds of issues. And I'm sympathetic to the idea that there are a lot of kids who are not learning social and emotional skills at home,
Mhm.
and that the consequences of that are that they come to school and that they
Right.
are ultimately disruptive. But I'm really concerned about asking teachers to fill that gap that parents in the community ultimately are supposed to fill,
Right.
and the opportunity cost of
Right.
doing it, right? Because every time we are spending teachers' time trying to teach kids about self-control or self-discipline, those are times we're not learning how to read and do math and learn about our history and science and the arts and so forth. And
Right.
this is
Yeah.
a real concern.
It is, and if you look at Indiana, what happened in the past 10 years, we have a like a state standardized test called iStep, and then now changed into iLearn, different name, and supposed to test the fourth graders, eighth graders, and 10th graders. So several years ago, a lot of schools are at like 70–80% people are proficient in math and language. And last year, only about less than 1/3 student passed the standard test. And but last December, the association, you're talking about professional association, the Association of Schools, Public School Superintendents, they had their annual meeting. And now on their agenda and on their program, here is something, there are three things to talk about, three themes. One is diversity, equity, and inclusion, how to, their best practice and all that. And the second one is social emotional learning. And third one is how to deal with parents at the school board meetings. They don't even talk about academic.
Right. It's a reactive agenda, and it's one that has drifted so far from the core mission and purpose of schools. Yeah.
Right. And you said you teach, you train superintendents as a professor.
Principals primarily. Yeah, I do occasionally work with the superintendent program, but most of my students at the university are teachers who are training to become school principals.
Oh, good. But have you seen something like the critical race theory can snip into?
Yes. It's been an interesting conversation here in Kentucky about this, because when parents will ask the superintendents, where is this critical race theory in our schools? 201, the superintendents all say, we don't teach that.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, it is true that no one is sitting children down and saying, okay, children, this is critical race theory, and here's what it means, and you should believe in this. It's actually more insidious than that. It's the way in which the core assumptions of critical race theory are influencing and informing the kinds of instructional choices that teachers are making on a regular basis.
Right.
And the truth is, most superintendents don't know how those choices are being made and the ways in which those assumptions of CRT are working their way into classrooms. A lot of principals don't know that either, in part because we've done so little work in most of our schools around real curriculum adoption. And that varies from district to district. I think there are a lot of places where districts are becoming much more thoughtful about adopting curricula which spell out the kinds of instructional materials we're going to use, the kinds of books we're going to read, the kinds of learning experiences we're going to offer children. So teachers don't have to make those decisions. They can focus on delivering the curriculum and assessing student progress and making instructional adjustments accordingly. And so that's the way I try to approach the core issues of critical theory in my own program, is to talk to our students about the importance of good, solid curriculum and how making good curriculum decisions actually advances the cause of equity. We spend so much time focused on racial differences that I think we actually undermine good policies and practices that have the capacity to close the achievement gap.
Right.
And when I use the term equity, it's a fundamental pillar in our principal preparation program here at this university. But when approach the equity issue, I say it's a lens through which we should look at all of our leadership decisions that we're making as school administrators. We should ask ourselves with every policy, every decision that we're making, how does this affect our most vulnerable population within our school? And then we that it doesn't mean that every decision has an equity dimension, but we ought to be looking at every decision through that lens so that we can give every student an opportunity to be successful. What we should not do is look at equity as an outcome variable, right? So you cannot look at every disparity across groups and conclude that that in and of itself is because of oppression or structures within the school that may be causing that. There could be those structures, and we ought to be sensitive to that.
Right.
The problem with critical race theory, as with critical theory in general, is that it assumes that every difference in group outcome is because of some oppressive structure. And that's simply not true, and it's not helpful for us to actually do our jobs better.
Right. And also, I know, well, especially in California, and the way they deal with equity is basically artificially kind of pushing the high achievers down so that to reduce the gap. Instead of bringing the people up, they are going to push people down. So recently in San Francisco, they have recall, right, of those 3 board members. One of the things they did is, or at least they try to do, is to, they have a very good public high school. So in the past, you have to take tests and all that. And they do have some kind of, you know, kind of affirmative action type of things to, you know, to, well, even that actually is become some form of discrimination, because they just look at how many Asians should be there, how many Blacks should be there. And then, so therefore the end result that the Asian student has to had higher score than the other races. But even that, the school board are not happy with that. They want to get rid of the test. So everything is based on a kind of lottery kind of system. And so that is the wrong way to reduce the gap or narrow the gap.
Yeah, but it's consistent with some of the more insidious assumptions and strategies of this whole sort of anti-racism ideology, right? From X. Kendi, who's one of the big names with this movement, you know, he's explicit about that, is that he says the answer to past discrimination is discriminating now. And so you see this actually with schools and districts actively discriminating against high achieving students, actively discriminating against Asian Americans. And so where is the equity and the justice in that? It completely turns our core American principles about equality of opportunity for all upside down.
Right. And also, that's something I always trying to figure out, like Abraham Kennedy's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. That was a recommend reading for high school students, teachers, and parents in our school district. That was at least a year ago. So later on, they took that page out from their website. But I wonder whether or not those superintendents read that book. Because if anyone read that book, it should, you shouldn't allow that book. I mean, you shouldn't recommend that book. And also, what besides what you said there, he says like basically he's going to use racial discrimination to solve the past discrimination, and not only the past. They're going to use future racial discrimination that solve the current racial discrimination. This is kind of more or less like the dictatorship of the proletariat in communist countries. But also he said that one paragraph there, he said that capitalism is racist and racism is capitalist. And they're basically saying this too, I mean, if you want to get rid of racism, you have to get rid of capitalism. And that, to me, that just basically promoting or advocating a communist revolution. But I just wonder whether or not any superintendent actually read that book.
Yeah, it's a wonder to me how anyone, any reasonable person, can read some of that material and not be appalled by its implications.
Right.
And maybe maybe it's a sign of how poorly we have educated a generation of people in the principles of American history and of our founding and of the Cold War and of the genocide
Right.
that has been committed by Marxist regimes
Right.
over the last 100 years. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there is no way the logical conclusion of the material that you read in Kendi
Yeah.
and of much of the critical race theory academic work
Right.
is totalitarianism.
Right.
It is
Exactly.
a logical conclusion of their line of thinking and their assumptions. And I think for many on the far left, they understand what they are doing. Their goal isn't simply to cause us to think more deeply about issues of race, because we certainly do need to be doing that
Right.
in this country. Their goal is actually to destroy the American political system as
Right.
we come to know it, and to destroy our economic system as
Right.
we know it, and to put it all within the control of the technical experts that they deem to be worthy to rule us
Right.
all.
Right. Right.
I don't
Yeah.
think that's an exaggeration at all. That
No,
is
yeah. I mean, like you said, I mean, he actually have a paragraph there talking about establish a department of what I call anti-racist.
yes, he does.
And that department has the power basically to monitor any public officials, not only their action, but also their talk and their thoughts.
That's right.
That's just like secret police.
Right.
I mean, what in his mind? I mean, what? How could he say something?
The only parallels we have for this in living memory are, the Soviet Politburo and
Right.
the mechanisms of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, those are the direct parallels to the kinds of stuff that is being advocated there.
Right, and also the same tactic. Like if you actually somehow you still have those racist thoughts, that you have to go through some kind of re-education. I mean, that is exactly, I mean, what happened in the former Soviet Union and in communist China.
Right.
But
That's Chairman Mao's dream, right?
Right, but the things like I still don't understand is, I mean, a lot of school corporations actually hired him, paid him to talk to the teachers.
Mhm.
That part I don't understand.
Yeah, and I think probably initially there was a lot of well-intended ignorance on their part, because I mean, look, we know that the racial achievement gap in student learning is longstanding, and it's shameful. It is
Right.
it is a terrible indictment of our educational system.
Right.
How many children of color come out of our educational system unable to read and do basic math?
Yep.
So we know this is a fundamental problem. And I think educators have been desperate to sort of look for tools, ideas, perspectives that would help us in some way do better by our minority students. And I think in that desperation, they turned to charlatans like Kendi and Robin DiAngelo and some of these other folks looking for answers.
Right.
And they found, I think, initially that stuff played really well with a certain kind of cultural elite in our communities
Right.
and in the larger world, without really looking at the implications of what they were doing and what these authors
I see.
were really saying
Mm,
about America and about our communities. And
right,
so
right, right.
hopefully conversations like the one you're having right now and the work of a lot of activist parents have made school districts and district leaders much more conscious of just how dangerous some of this stuff is, and maybe they're making more thoughtful decisions about it now.
Right. Hopefully that would happen. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, and you're going to see not not only students will be harmed, but also the teachers will be harmed too, if we allow this kind of ideology to spread.
Mhm.
Yeah, and also I think there are also like foundations out there, like Bill Gates and also the uh, Zuckerberg foundations. Yeah, they are also kind of behind all of this. They give a lot of money. Um, so do you know what I mean? Where the money come from for hiring like DEI officers?
Well, I mean, a lot of that comes from the general education fund and a lot of the school districts. In some cases, they may be able to utilize certain federal funds for hiring those kinds of positions. Our schools have, it seems like for years, been awash in a lot of federal grant money. Right now, there's tons of money that is supposed to be going to try to alleviate the learning gaps
Hmm.
caused by COVID that are being spent in all manner of ways in schools and districts not really related to COVID. And I imagine some of those federal monies are being used to hire personnel. In some cases, maybe personnel who are connected
Okay,
to various diversity initiatives.
right. I look at it, at least in the end, there is, I mean, many school district has this DI officer, and they paid about $90,000 per year, which is almost more than twice of entry level teachers, and then even our Indianapolis Public School Library is also hiring someone like that. And then our state government has a chief DI officer uh, who was highest paid employee of our state government. And I always wonder like where that money come from just to have those positions. I mean, if you want to address, the achievement gap and all that, the as a teachers might think the most obvious way is to get more teachers, and so you have a small class size. I mean, when you have like 30 students, there's very hard to teach, especially at the younger age, right? I mean, high schools maybe you could handle that. Even that is kind of hard, but the younger age, elementary school, middle school, when you got more than 30 people in your class, I mean, your academics will suffer, no matter how good a teacher you are.
Mhm.
But they never address that. They never, I mean, every time when they're trying to get more money from the state, they will use that.
Mhm.
But once they got money, that's not the things they do. They'll
Mhm.
spend that on something else.
Right, right. Yes. And this is one of the things that, I mean, we've talked a lot in the last year about the need for more academic transparency.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to know, we need to understand more about, what is being taught in our classrooms and how. But there's also a real need for more financial transparency.
Right.
And there are mechanisms. It's actually much trickier to have a meaningful financial transparency in education than people would think.
Oh, wow.
But it is possible to have more transparency, and this is one of the things that we need to be asking for,
Right, right.
because these sorts of decisions that are being made, directly speak to how are our public resources being used.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. I just give you a last question. Okay. So how can we save our public education. Because if we don't do anything, parents will pull the kids out of public education.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a multi-pronged approach that needs to happen right now, and I think part of it is that we need to take all of this energy that was generated with parent frustration over the potential of critical race theory being taught in our schools, over the mask mandate,
vaccine mandate,
over vaccines. All of that energy needs to be translated into permanent structures of parent empowerment, right? So every community needs some kind of parent organization whose purpose is to keep parents informed about what is happening in schools and to keep parents engaged in school governance, and potentially to recruit and train and run campaigns to elect different people to local school board positions. I think it would be healthy for every district to have contested school board elections every cycle. There should be elections, because that makes the whole system more accountable. It forces board members and the public to talk about local education issues, and I think that if that happens, then that will be the greatest fruit that we might see grow from the difficulties and conflict between parents and the schools over the last 2 years. And they need to be permanent structures. We need to have organizations, parent and citizen organizations in every community that are essentially watchdog groups. And they represent parental voices. They challenge the status quo. They seek to make the schools accountable and transparent, and that should be our goal.
Sorry.
No worries.
I need. Give me 1 second.
No worries.
Someone's quite persistent. Okay. All right. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think that is, I totally agree with you on that, because the parents needs to take in charge. And after all, it's the parents' responsibility to raise their children, right? To educate their children. I mean, they can delegate to teachers like us, but still they are in charge. But right now, you probably have seen that a lot of teachers, especially young teachers, think that they are in charge instead of parents, and they don't want parents to get involved.
Right, and we've got to turn that on its upside down. We've got to change the whole paradigm of how schools work and what they're for. We need to promote the idea that parents are the first and primary educators of their children.
Right.
Schools exist to support parents in that work of forming children to become virtuous men and women. That's the other piece I think that's missing, is that schools exist not just to teach basic academic skills or to train people to be good workers someday, but to form them into virtuous men and women. And that's first a parent responsibility, and secondly, it's the school to support them in that endeavor.
Right, and also part of that is to teach them how to think for themselves, instead of political indoctrination. Actually really help them. And this sometimes I think the people playing the word game, like critical thinking is good, right? But critical theory is not. But sometimes there is how they kind of hijack the meaning of words. And but still, like I definitely agree with you, not just being not just academics, not just be a good find a good job or the job skills, but also to be a good citizen and a good a good member of the community, right? You still have we need to teach that virtue on that. But now that's not happening. It's just more political indoctrination than actually teaching. And the teachers, I mean, I know a lot of teachers don't like it. It's like right now they're still afraid to speak out.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I really
It's my pleasure.
appreciate. Yeah.
Talk again sometime.
Yeah, definitely. I hope I can talk to you more because I know I can learn a lot from you. You still have a lot, and we just kind of, way scratch the surface. You have so many years experience in this field.
Well, you keep up the good work. We'll keep partnering together.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.